Let me now invite the other members of the panel to come up and join Patricia. So Juan Garcia Burgos, who is the Head of Public Engagement, Stakeholders and Communications at the European Medicines Agency, currently based in London. Who knows where you'll be a year from now. Ilaria Passarani, the Head of Food and Health for BERC, which is the European Consumer Organisation. And Spiros Zorbas, who is the President of the Greek Carers Network, Epioni, and a member of the Patient Advisory Board of an IMI project called Radar CNS. So, Patricia, you've given us a sort of a good overview, particularly what the IMI is funding and supporting in terms of the big data projects. Let me perhaps just start by saying, big data is one of those things that's very hyped. We're all convinced that, big data is going to change everything. And from some perspectives, it already has. If you think about the way that our social media experience is shaped by big data, whether it's Facebook or it's what the search results that Google shows you, we are already experiencing in real time, in our real lives, the power of big data. In terms of health, we've been talking about big data and digital for some time, because if health systems are fragmented, health data is even more so. I was once talking to someone from a hospital, and she was very proud of her department and said, we are really good at tracking all of our patients and collecting all of the results, so our clinicians have complete picture when they see their patients. And I said, so what about the other departments? She said, oh no, I can't guarantee the quality of their databases. Our database that we've put time and effort in is our jewel in the crown. So even if you talk across the health system, even within institutions, you have this silo mentality. So perhaps for the promise of big data and digital health to be realized, we have to overcome some of those things. So it's really exciting to see, Patricia, this overview and the focus that's been put by the IMI, not just on individual diseases, but also coordination and allowing information to flow. So let me start by, perhaps we could see the results of the Slido poll, please, where you can see what was the challenges that people had that would stop them from sharing data. Sorry, the tech team didn't know I was going to ask that, but I thought that would be a good place to start, because we asked you for your views. And then the top concern that people have is the purpose of that data. How's it going to be used? Now, if you think about the earlier panel, we talked about the need for communication, looking people in the eye, listening to them and speaking to them. And here you see the result of that. If people don't know and don't trust the purpose that the data will be used for, they won't share it. And that's the number one priority. But very closely behind that is this issue of security of the data. How would it be used? And then, who's going to make sure that data remains private and won't be hacked and used in other things? So maybe let me start by inviting our panel members. Who would like to pick up perhaps on some of these issues? Ilaria, would you like to start with that? Just go ahead and speak, and the tech people will see the microphone.
Thank you very much. In the meantime, I would like to say good morning, everybody. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I would also like to say that I'm personally very much convinced about the role of big data in making healthcare systems more responsive to patient needs, more to help healthcare systems to provide better quality of care. So I really embrace the potential of big data. But coming from a consumer organization, we see the problem of and the challenge of data protection as key. And I would like to start by mentioning a study which was published just 2 weeks ago by our Norwegian member, the Norwegian Consumer Council. They looked into 22 connected devices who measure blood pressure and blood glucose, so medical devices, and they found serious breaches to consumer privacy and data protection because the data was passed to the US and to East Asia without notifying the users, because a lot of data were sent via emails, because the terms and conditions of these mobile apps were so long and undecipherable for a layperson. And there we see the real problem, because people embrace the technology, especially when it comes to health. You see the value that it can have, but then you are afraid because you don't know how your data is handled and to whom it is going. And of course, when we speak about big data, we no longer have the secure paper version of things, and it's making the guaranteeing the privacy of the data much more challenging. So it's extremely important to ensure that the new framework of data protection, so the General Data Protection Regulation, which will be implemented as of 2018, respond to the challenges posed by the new technology, because the legislation was drafted already a while ago, and it seems that it's never up to speed with the technology. So we want to make sure that, and we have to make sure that the legislation truly protects patients' data, and to reassure them about this, so that the full potential of big data can be exploited.
Thank you, Ilaria. Juan, how is the European Medicines Agency looking at this issue of potential challenges and opportunities of big data in terms of patients?
Yes, thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Again, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation. I think big data is something which is very much in our agenda, definitely. I think I would like to echo Ilaria. I think it's really changing the way that we approach medicines development, medicines evaluation, and healthcare systems. And definitely, we fully believe, as most of our activities, that patients should be really involved in order to make it properly, to progress in the right way. Looking at what has been said this morning, I think I would like to very much confirm the idea that we think what is really essential is that there is adequate information about what is the purpose of how big data is going to be used, how the data is going to be shared, which is the benefit, the added value that is going to bring, how it is going to be handled, all the privacy guarantees and all these safeguards. And this needs to be fully communicated and very well communicated. And I think not only to patients, I think we have to go beyond that. I think when we're talking about big data, we have to go beyond the patient community. And I'm sure Ilaria will agree with me, we have to go to consumers and to the society itself. I think the potential of big data is huge, but it's also huge the risk that if it is not properly communicated from the very beginning, we may have to overcome a lot of resistance from the society in its implementation. And I think that the risk could be amplified in such a way. So how to do that? I mean, it's very simple to say, but how to do is really difficult. And I think maybe the only recipe that we have based on our experience that to really, and linking very much to the discussion before, to sit patients and consumers in the strategic driving seat. In order to, in every project, patients should be involved, but not only involved just to tick the box, should be involved really helping and drafting the direction to go. I think it's one of the only ways that we can really try to ensure that we go in the right way.
Thank you. Let me come back to Patricia for a moment, because I'm just struck by these big IMI projects, several of them. I mean, the culture of each project that had to be developed, breaking down the traditional culture that you would find inside a pharmaceutical company, which is our data is our intellectual property, that's our commercial success, that's our business model. The idea that that then becomes shared, potentially with your competitors, as well as other academics, I imagine was a big barrier to get over. Can you give us some insight? And I know the new projects have only just started this year, so you're at the beginning. That means you're at the moment of establishing trust and relationships, and people are reluctantly agreeing to share their data. Can you tell us what it was like developing some of these conversations, or perhaps convincing your colleagues that, yes, you're going to share data?
That's an excellent question.
Mm.
And yes, it's a matter of culture, trust, and then if we really commit, and this is part of the trust, if we really listen to the needs outside the pharma, and we really care about the success that it brings for the patients and therefore for us, we need to hold that promise that if we have data that can bring that added value, we need to share that added value. Of course, then comes the techniques where and that's fair, where all the guarantees can be given, like to the patient's data, also to the pharma data, that they will be used in a secure, etc. way. In any case, I think as pharma, and I see it within Novartis, the train has left the station. We can't not ignore that we need not to evolve in a more open source mindset, even if we have to protect our IP. So in Novartis, we are also thinking about the big data, and maybe starting first internally. I mean, internally we also have a lot of data pools that are not necessarily connected. But the mindset is there, and I think that one of the best proofs is that Novartis is part of different of those programs, not only Harmony, but also 2 or 3 others. Yes, we believe in that ambition of big data. Will it be easy? No. There are learnings. But the ambition is there, and I think bit by bit the openness is there.
Okay. Let me now turn to Spiros, because you're sitting one of these IMI projects, and your specialization is around digital health. We heard from Ilaria that when a consumer organization tested some of these digital apps and connected devices, they found the data going all over the place. It was unclear where the control of it and the quality of it, etc. So that links into this issue of trust, the privacy and the purpose of the data, which we can see is the number one priority. What can you add to this conversation?
Yes, those issues are really important for patients. And I'm part of a patient advisory board of the Radar CNS IMI project, which is a 5-year project to monitor patients with depression, multiple sclerosis, and epilepsy. So we will use a wearable device, a normal watch, plus a smartphone application, which will include also voice recognition, so new technologies. The positive thing from my perspective is that young patients are more adapted to technology than older ones. But of course they have to receive all the guarantees that their data is safe.
Yep.
And of course it's a matter of personality. Some people are always more suspicious than others.
So in this particular example, you are talking about patients wearing a smartwatch and having an app on their phone. So data from their everyday life, they're carrying that all the time. Where is it going, and what are they getting back out of it so they feel that there is some return for their personal data?
Yes, that's a crucial question. Not to see patients as a way to receive some data, but how to use all these devices to motivate people, for example, to walk more, to sleep regular times. And Radar CNS will monitor not only mental illness, but also recovery. So that's it's important also for us to give this motive to patients.
So this data is going to be collected and analyzed. How is it going to be fed back to the patients?
The project is under development. We just had some focus group. King's College is leading the project with Janssen. And we are in the process of developing this. It's not already set.
Okay. Let me just open a question to the audience, because I think this is absolutely vital. We heard in the earlier session that some good examples of patient engagement included these biobanks of tissues that the patients have put forward, but they still had ownership. How many of you have some kind of wearable device, like an activity tracker, a pedometer, etc.? Now, the great news about that is I'm assuming it has some way for you to see, great, I've done 10,000 steps, or how much you've slept, but the aggregate information from all of you is going to go somewhere. And it's going to provide great insight, like people who go to conferences in Brussels have an average of 1 hour less sleep than when they're back home, for example. Where is that data going? Who is going to be able to reap the benefits of that insight? And do any of you question that? Or do you feel you're getting enough benefit from just having an overview of what you've done for the day and it doesn't matter where the other information goes? Any comments on that? Okay, we've got several hands up. Let's get the microphone in. Let's start, yes, with the gentleman at the back, and then we'll move forward.
Hi, I'm Gurmat Sandhu. Recently, I was diagnosed as a diabetic, so type 2 with control, and I can prick and measure my blood sugar. My partner is an engineer who loves data points, so before I knew it, I was at this workshop where they stick a patch on me, and for 2 weeks, I just scanned myself like in a supermarket, check out. What I realized is that, to Spiros's point, actually, there were two aspects. One is I actually understood that I had a diabetic problem. I could not process my sugar levels. I could take drinks with or without fat. I could see how it just went up. I could take fatty meals. So I started to experiment and learn this. The other thing it did is that it showed my partner that I really was sick. I could not metabolize glucose. I could show the evidence, because when you have diabetes, people say, oh, it doesn't matter, you can take a bit of sugar and you're just making it up. And I had the evidence. The other thing I started doing was I started to measure it over the night when I went to the bathroom, scan. I actually learned to see what my insulin level was like during the night when it started to go up. So I was forced into this, but I learned a lot about myself. My partner learned a lot, that I'm a much more confident person. I didn't care where the data went to, but I understood myself, my illness, a lot better than if I just measured my blood sugar.
So the trade-off there was enough. The new insight and knowledge you gathered about yourself was enough for where the data went beyond that was less of a question.
Yeah, because when you become a patient, I'm a pharmacist, I work with patients, so I understood. But what I realized was when I became a patient of a chronic illness, I have to say I was actually ill-prepared for what it actually meant. If you've been healthy and suddenly you get a diagnosis and you are sick, you're not well, something's not functioning, you have to get your head around it and convince yourself that you are not well on that aspect, and then convince other people that you're not. And this personal data, like I said, I went along because my partner registered in the end, which I'm really glad, because I was a bit skeptical. I'm a scientist, I don't want to do this. But in the end, now I would say for a newly diagnosed diabetic, it's a really good tool for 2 weeks, because you learned about yourself, you learn about what foods you can and can't eat. And as a diabetic, that's really helpful, because it does make a difference.
Excellent. I have several hands up on this side of the room, so let's work. Gentleman behind you with a red jacket, then the behind with a grey T-shirt, and then I'll come over here. Yes.
I have just two comments. The first one, there is a European program that's called Parent, that is allowing data transfer in Europe. So it's essentially data that comes from hospital, and they went through all the process to allow transfer of data, of patient data, hospital patient data, from one country to another one for scientific purposes. The second comment I have, I really recommend you to go to the Advance website. Advance, again, is an IMI project. We have developed a lot of tools in Advance, and one of the tools is essentially using big data, because the purpose of Advance is to look to the benefit risk of a vaccine in the post-marketing phase. So in Advance, we have 27 partners, 19 European countries. So you can imagine that we are dealing with a lot of data. We have a first run on pertussis vaccination. So we collect 35 million data from children in Europe vaccinated. So that, go and look to advanced website, and we put all these things so that you don't have to duplicate that, and it's going to go.
And it's
much
publicly
faster.
available.
It's open science, so you just go to the website and you get access to all the tools.
Excellent, thank you. There was a guy behind with a grey T-shirt, and then I'll be coming to the gentleman over there. Yes.
Hello. Basically, I've got 3
Who are you?
comments. Schafrath Gregor, part of the European Commission. I'm a computer scientist, so please excuse me if I have a different perspective on it. So I'm a bit torn because on one hand side, I do like the possibility to validate research. And for that, obviously, we have to have a repository of some kind. On the other hand, I'm pretty skeptical about a couple of security aspects, which are also mentioned here. The example that we've heard is very nice on a personal level. I don't see the requirement to put the data into a cloud, though, yet. And it's not actually big data either, because it concerns one specific person just collecting local data and running some local analysis on it. He could also just collect it, go to his medicine doctor and have it verified. Now, if I put my data into a cloud, as you already mentioned, I have to have a certain level of confidence on how the data is going to be used, how secure it is, whether my privacy is going to be respected, and so on. And I see a set of issues there, starting with the question on how do I actually describe for what purpose, by whom, my data may be used on what aggregation level. This is already a difficult task, I think, because it's difficult to enumerate all the possible uses and to be specific about it at the same time. Now, obviously, there are going to be derivatives of my data, and I might have objections as to whether these derivatives may be used for specific purposes. I don't even want to go into the direction of asking, well, covered access to this to the data, saying that an insurance company trying to fine-tune their products will want to have specific information about the population and about specific patient groups, and therefore starts financing research, which to some extent yields it basic elements of answers that they will somehow aggregate into a new product, which may be positive or negative for me as a patient. Okay. And last thing is, any security assertions are only valid and useful to me if they are enforceable, which means I have to be able to detect misuse of my data, which is extremely difficult because if there's data theft, the data is essentially still there, so I can't verify somebody accessed it. If it's misused, I can't immediately see it. I have trust with respect to the persons and the doctors I interact with. I don't see how that trust can be established to other entities.
Okay, thank you. You put a lot of questions on the table for our panel, and let's just take, there were 2 other requests on this side, and I'll come to you in a minute, but let's just take these. Yes?
Well, just to answer your question, I don't care about my medical data. I have nothing to hide. The only thing I wish is that the data, for instance, an alarm about my heart or anything, come in the right hands and that they can immediately intervene so that I survive.
Okay.
But just to tell you a short story about medicine by prevention, for which I convinced our minister to refund in Belgium, the first country in Europe. I tell you a short story. I'm in telemonitoring since almost 10 years. We had, together with German companies, developed a preventive heart monitoring device which alarmed you in time if an exception as predefined by the cardiologist on the algorithm of the chip in the belt which you were wearing, so that you could survive. So the alarm went on your smartphone, on your family, and on your cardiologist.
Right.
Pedro Brigada, one of the most famous cardiologists in Belgium and maybe worldwide, tested it during half a day. So you can imagine if he takes half a day to test it, he must consider it very valuable. He said, Toon, we are going to save 200-300 people's lives in Belgium per day. When later we went to the head of the clinic, the university clinic, to install it, the director general or the CEO told me, he said, Toon, impossible to install it because we will lose many visits to the clinic. So it will be a decrease of income for the clinic.
Okay, so it's
Can
all
you
about
imagine?
the incentives in the system that are disincentivizing the implementation of new things. Thank you. And there was just one last input before I come to the panel, and then I'll be coming back later. Yes. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Wenhua Li from the Structured Genomics Consortium at UltraDD. So I have one point to the panel, which is we're looking at digital health. And we think we know what we're trying to capture with all these devices or the data we offer to the cloud to be analyzed. And we are very constrained because we touched on healthcare, on medicines. However, I would like to remind everybody here, I have a supermarket
Loyalty card, yeah.
They, I think, know more about me than my doctors and anybody else. They know what I eat, what I buy, how frequently I do it, and we're not regulating that. Even worse, your Facebook, tweets, etc. The natural text mining will give you so much more data that any one of us can imagine what we can capture. And finally, to the point, Richard Dahl, smoking, lung cancer, that came from merging completely orthogonal data. So,
okay.
Something for free.
So lots of questions for our panel to think about. This issue of when the data goes into the cloud, how do we maintain consent about use of it when it may be used in multiple different ways, in multiple different formats? You know, we may trust the individual doctor we see, but do we trust anyone who's going to use it? And then once it's in the cloud, do we know when somebody's essentially peeking through it that shouldn't or is doing things with it? The importance here of deriving real-world data from a number of different places. And by the way, my mother likes to screw with the supermarket cards. She refuses and has always refused to have a supermarket fidelity card. However, she insists she has the right to have the points. So she, at the supermarket checkout, always says to the person behind, "Would you like my points?" So the supermarket collection of data for anyone who's around my mother is always going to be wrong. So, panel, who would like to pick up on the issue of pulling together data from different sources, security, trust, the cloud? Lots of meaty topics for you. And Ilaria, there's one question very specifically to you from the audience, which is if the consumer organisation tested where the data was going and is concerned about that, what kind of feedback would a consumer want? So you can think about that for the moment if you want. Maybe, Juan, let's start with you. I mean, you're in the position of the regulator and policy maker. The concerns that have been put up there are saying, okay, we can write in one level of informed consent, and we can write in one level of security, but how do we enforce it? How do we maintain it?
I think this illustrates very much, I think, the concern that we tried to present before. I really don't have an answer to all that, but I think it clearly makes that we need to have these answers. If we really want to progress properly, we need to ensure that when people ask, we can explain properly which are the security safeguards which are in place to really answer all these questions. And I think one of the main risks that we are having is that this is moving so fast. The velocity in which it advances is really the challenge. How really can we keep pace on that? And how can we ensure that we all have an agreed criteria, an agreed threshold of security, of added value, etc. So, I mean, for example, I think there are also different needs from different people, and this has seen very, very clearly. I mean, for example, for regulators, we are looking at big data in one way, but health data in terms of providing information is looking other aspects. So, are the same standards able to apply to the different usefulness or utilities that we are talking? I think that's what maybe we need to work all together, because we need to be able to provide these answers before actually that the services and the tools come in place. Otherwise, I think we are risking very much to fail.
Okay, thank you. Ilaria, would you like to respond, particularly to the question that was asked to you and the broader aspects of trust and security?
Yeah, the problem is that we accept in the online world something we would never accept in the offline world. What if you go to the grocery store and then your sales assistant asks you, where were you before? Where are you going? Who are your friends? What is your disease? And I'm not sure that we don't care about this information being shared, because if the supermarket collect information about what your preferences in terms of food choices, it's one thing. But what if you are denied a job because you have diabetes, for example? I mean, I think there is more at stake than with other data, and that's why also in the legislation, health data are more protected and they are considered more sensitive than the others. So it's a different thing. And the trust, it's vital, because if we lose now people trust in the devices, then we will not be able to collect the data. You asked about wearables devices, and just yesterday we launched a campaign which is called Watch Out, which is about smart clocks for children. And we found out that first the safety button that doesn't work. So as a parent you might think, okay, my children is safe because you can press the button if he's in danger. Well, it doesn't work, so it's unsafe in itself, the device. But then there are no terms and conditions. These products are produced in China and then are sold without even having a notice. So you don't really know who is storing the data and for which purpose. And we always end up to the same point. In terms of the questions that I was asked before, in terms of feedback from consumers, it's very difficult to seek for redress and enforcement and compensation if you suffer detriment from the unlawful sharing of data. And that's another challenge, and I'm not even sure that the new data protection regulation will address this, because it's very intangible. Still, the impact of this unlawful share of sensitive health data can have a big impact on on the life of patients. So it's a problem also of enforcement, which is more complex in an online world, of course.
Okay. Spiros, maybe you'd like to pick up on this, and going back to the fact that in your project there are people wearing sensors that's gathering data, and that data is obviously going to give insight to them. But I'm just thinking about, if you buy a book through Amazon, or if you do some shopping, they say people who were interested in this also bought that, which gives you an idea. Oh, so if people are wearing sensors and you can see how you're doing, will your project also give some feedback to say, oh, well, other people who wore this sensor and were feeling really happy on this day, then did that. So you can see where you fit in the broader community.
I agree with you that it's important to be cautious about the data that is gathered. For example, we all use Google Mail, and who knows who has access to our mails or our information if we all use Google Drive, or so it's not only health applications that use personal data. And I really agree with a representative from the Commission that it's important to think of such questions, and probably next year we will have to have in a panel somebody who can think of such sensitive issues. And I agree also with our colleague with the diabetes, that if you can monitor something, it can really help you to be more concrete. For example, it's something different to say I walk, or I walk 15,000 steps every day. It's more tangible. Or it's something different to say I sleep enough, or I can see that I sleep 8 hours per day. So it's really helpful for some patients at least.
Okay, let me turn to Patricia perhaps and ask you about the various projects the IMI is funding, which are all pulling together data from different diseases, and then there's some kind of overall coordination mechanism. Does that mean that the data from the different projects is all being aggregated and that there will be a further analysis to pull out new insights, or just that all of them are expected to collect data in the same way?
To my knowledge, it's all disease group will collect data for the diseases. What will be common will be the legal framework, the data management standards, but the content is hemato-oncology, Alzheimer. Of course, maybe we can consider at the same time to have also the project which addresses the comorbidity, and then you can imagine that those data will be shared, but that will need a new project and a new frame. But for the time being, the data of the diseases will remain in the disease group.
Okay, because I mean, we heard from our input from the audience that some of the great breakthroughs on cancer. Yes, but maybe we'll have a mic to you. And also remember in the earlier panel about research agendas, how the patients wanted to talk about comorbidities and it didn't get dealt with.
I can just comment on that. Matthias Gottwald from Bayer. We, in this overarching coordination project, plan to have the aggregated results from the various disease projects in one data platform so that everybody has an idea what has been done in the disease-specific projects and then can, if something looks interesting, go to the disease-specific project and go deeper. We can't, for data privacy reasons and legal concerns, we can't share the raw data across all projects. At least we have no solution found for that yet. But to have the aggregated results shared and accessible, this is the minimum we would like to achieve.
And when you say we, who does we mean? Is that aggregated data only to the participants of the project or the broader scientific community?
The broader scientific community.
Okay.
We try to have an open access approach so that as much as possible what is coming out of the projects can be shared with the whole community.
Okay, so when we come back to this issue about the purpose of the data being collected, the purpose is not just to make insights in that area, but also to move our general knowledge about health further. Okay, I have several hands up in the audience. Patricia, did you want to say something?
No, maybe to add, because what we will do is the results of the data analysis, because again, that's the insight. That's what will move the needle and impact decision making. And I guess that is true for all the programs. As soon as we have new insights, these will be shared across the community, across Harmony, across the community, and a large level, patients included. Then the aggregated data is another step. But as the project progresses, the results will be shared.
Okay, I see a couple of hands coming up, but let's hear from the gentleman in blue and white, because you haven't had a chance to speak yet. I've come to you already a couple of times.
Hi, yeah, my name's Andy Gibson. I'm an associate professor in public involvement. I think there is a real important issue about people's individual data and how it might be used and how it might be used in a way that's detrimental to them. But I also think there's actually an altruistic issue here, which is that many people are very happy. They're aware that things like within the UK, for instance, you've got National Health Service collects large amounts of data. People are clear that that isn't identifiable to them. So they feel, in a way, similar to like blood donation. You've given that data in an altruistic way. And if it's used in an altruistic way to improve healthcare, I think people are very happy with that. The problem becomes if they think that that trust and that altruistic motive has been abused. This is not about individual interests, it's about that collective sense that the data is then being used for other purposes and that implicit agreement has been broken. So I think we need very clear rules about that, and this is where the patient engagement or involvement becomes very powerful, because you've got to have those rules and you've got to have a very transparent process with active public involvement and engagement so that when decisions are made, because there will be grey areas, that's done in a very open and transparent way. And I think we can learn a bit from what people were saying about the tissue banks and who gets... I think that's the way forward for us with this. Excellent. Thank you.
Well, I see there was a comment up here where, the patient's interest and willingness to share their data may be affected by the fact if they think the insurance companies might then use it to deny them access to either insurance or hike up their premiums, etc., which comes back to this issue about the purpose of the data. And you've highlighted that people want to support knowledge, but not if they think it's going to have a negative impact. Yes, there's a gentleman at the back who's got his hand up. Let's get the microphone to you. Yes, the mic will come down to you.
My name is Michael Sørensen, and I'm coming from the Scandi-Hooligan countries, i.e. Denmark and the other Scandinavian countries, and I'm a little baffled when we hear all this about big data and all that, because we have almost for a decade, a century, had big data on all people with a personal identifiers and all that, so we can link everything. We have that based on one thing, and that is trust. The other part is it's not a commodity. It's owned by the society and the individual patients. And I think that is needed, because you cannot obtain and maintain trust among patients and citizens if it isn't a common ownership and by the patients or the inhabitants. And I would also say the other thing, which is really challenging me, and maybe it's because of IBM or something like that, they say the more data, the better, which is pure BS. Sometimes I'm running a lot of epidemiology studies and all that, and sometimes we can manage with one county out of 5, so sort of like a basis of 1 million people, healthy and diseased people, that suffice to get clear answers. And when we talk about autism associated with vaccines, we pulled 300,000 subjects who were vaccinated with children vaccination, and we could prove that there was no association whatsoever. It was collected, everybody data is collected. So there's no skewness, there's no bias, confounding and all that. And yet there is, but that's another matter. But it's the purest data you can imagine. So
you said it's co-owned by society and the patient. Can you just explain how that happens in a Scandinavian context?
So it goes, if I should describe the situation as it is now, all data goes into public databases. And I have a civil registration number. I can go in on a website. I can see the results of the test or the biopsy or what have you online. And it's secured because I go in via secure access and encrypted line and all that. So I can also grant access to the pharmacist if I want the pharmacist to go through my medication. And it's all linked together. So I have access, I know what's going on, and I can sort of regulate who get access to it. So my tissue can be used by the public to, via an IRB, to research, genetic testing, what have you, and all that. But I can opt out also. And we have a central registry, so you cannot pull data on me. If I opt out on genetic testing or something like that, nobody is permitted to do so. So it's extremely structured.
What are opt-out rates? What proportion of people choose to opt out?
I think there's 500 or something like that out of 5 million.
Some quick maths, less than 1%?
Absolutely. It's virtually nobody. I mean, everybody does check every time, and every time they say, oh, there was no hit this time.
Okay.
Again.
So this issue of trust and security is addressed to the extent that 99% of the population are okay with the usage.
Yeah, and exactly as we heard from Spain, where you move from one area to the other area, it's no issue, because when I show up at a doctor somewhere else or at a hospital, they can find all my tissue, all my data, everything, and we can do it across the region also.
So they don't have a system that's fragmented. Panel, would you like to come in on some of the issues that have been raised from the audience around security, around transparency, around reuse, around this sort of trade-off between the altruism of providing your data to help science move on and then feeling that you're still going to get something out of it?
So it is indeed linked to the purpose, and that's the feedback we already had from the patient associations involved in the Harmony project, is that this purpose was, as a matter of fact, more linked to the altruistic part. And also on the data ownership part. If I'm a data owner, I want to decide whether I give that data or not, and to make an informed decision, I need to know the purpose, but also, of course, the risk. But it was more from, if I'm okay with the purpose of research, of course I'm happy to share the data. So that was a clear outcome. And in a project like Harmony, indeed we have a lot of the discussion of having this right balance, and to use a legal term, the proportionality principle of sharing data for the greater good while ensuring the individual security and data privacy, which sometimes is a trade-off not that easy to make. And we do not say that the way Harmony is built, that the patient that will share the data will get an individual benefit. It's clearly more a benefit for the population that will be suffering from hemato-oncology. As long as you make that clear, in an informed consent or in a communication, and the patient has the decision power to consent or not, that's important. I think we need to be very clear about what we can offer, and again, what we hear, and that's why we have patients in the different groups. If it's for the research and it can benefit the whole population in this or this indication, most of the patients will say yes, and if some say no, I think we have to respect that, as long as it's well informed.
Ilaria, let me come to you and ask you what, and perhaps it's a little unfair to ask you to predict what the consumer organisations might think of this, but if we're going to try and sort of move our understanding of health conditions further, we do need to essentially cross-reference medications, how people feel, and then do they walk that day, did they sleep that day, what did they eat, etc. So to start to build a real picture of the lived experience of someone. Now maybe that's going to generate a lot of insights, but I can imagine that's going to open a whole new area of questions of concerns and privacy. Have you, within your own networks, started to talk about this?
Yeah, yes, of course. We speak about big data, not just in the healthcare sector, but also in other areas in the financial services sector. And we see the benefits and we see the potential risks. As consumer organization, our main concern is that consumers give a truly informed consent. And when we speak about health data, it's even more so, and it's even more difficult because we don't know exactly, even if we give up our data for medical research, we can give it for a study, but then we don't know if these data are used by others for other purposes. So defining the scope and the purpose of the data is essential. It's about trust, as I said, it's about the security, it's about control, and it's about the principle that my data are mine. So I also think it's important, for example, if we look at the electronic record, to differentiate the data that I can decide to make available, to maximize the use of the information. For example, I would be willing to give my data about, my blood tests, but not data about a precondition I have or a surgery I had. And this can be done by, for example, sealed envelopes, because I think that people want to be in control also of who access which data and when, and to be able to say no at a certain moment. But in this world of big data, this is much more complex. And that's why people might not embrace the technology if we don't provide them the tools to understand and to go through the process by giving informed consent at all stages.
Let me now refer to the example that we had from the earlier panel, where we had the example of the specific Dravet syndrome. And there was a university that owned the rights to a test and wasn't prepared to share that because it was going to destroy their own expertise and therefore their ability to work in that area. So if we have a world where we're encouraging patients to share their data and their information to contribute to the greater good, there are other elements in the system that have perverse incentives to keep things closed. So panel members, what do you think we can do to open all of those doors so that the data is shared more freely and that the full benefits can be reaped from the potentials of big data?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. I think it's not only the patients. I think it's broader than that. And I think the way is how to promote a collaborative environment in which everyone is really opening up and working together. I think it's again about trust, it's again about information, it's a bit about setting, agreeing on the way that data should be shared, on the way that data should be used, and very importantly to communicate which are the benefits for everybody of doing so. I think we can set up some rules where everyone feels comfortable, feels secure, not only individuals but also organizations. It can maybe progress on this direction. And I think again, what is important is that these discussions happen as soon as possible. There are organizations, authorities, put this very much as a priority in their agenda so that they promote this dialogue and they have all misunderstandings, all concerns discussed and clarified, because this can pave maybe the way to overcome these difficulties. We need to try to avoid misinformation, misconceptions before they come And the only way to do that is to sit everybody together and discuss it properly. I think in terms, for example, of regulatory authorities, there are so many examples in which, for example, big data can inform decision-making, can help maybe to complement information from randomized clinical trials. But they need to ensure that everyone agrees on the way to analyze and use this information. Otherwise, it can be a very complex discussion.
Okay. Patricia, let me come back to a question about the big data projects you're involved in. If the purpose of creating big data is new insights, and those new insights might lead to new intellectual property, who gets to own that? Who gets to monetize and make money off any potential intellectual property that's come from a collective sharing?
That is, maybe Maicas can comment. This is completely described in the grant agreement. So there is, I don't know by heart, to be fair, all the paragraphs, etc. What I can say that this is discussed and pre-discussed even before the project starts, according to the partner who has submitted the research questions, etc. So, I mean, it comes a bit back to talk more in general terms. We need to flag the risk and the gaps, and then we need to put procedures and governance in place to make sure that there is no misabuse. And I think I like 2 times you emphasize that this domain is so quickly evolving, and probably what we put in place today has to be changed in 1 year time. I think what our responsibility is to be very, very monitoring all those gaps and risks and making sure that we address, again, people, processes, incentives to be able to address and avoid any misuse and go into the right direction. So maybe that grant agreement is today fixed. Maybe we have to revise it in 2 years because the domain evolves. But this is something we are very much aware. And then thanks for emphasizing that, because that's important.
So this is a very fast-moving environment. Let me perhaps ask the audience another question. Big data is something that, we have a lot of hopes that big data will somehow fix a lot of society's problems. What do you hope big data could do for patients? What problems do you think it could solve? Yes, you've got your hand up.
Well, the magic word I didn't hear so far here in the audience or in the panel is artificial intelligence, deep learning algorithms.
Yeah.
Why don't they speak about that? Why don't they put all that on the data which they have? Why don't they link all the data which they have among each other? I'm sure if they do that, they find a solution for cancer in 1 year.
When you say they, who is they?
All the research institutes that work on the subject of cancer.
Okay.
Be it pharmaceutical companies, be it universities, everybody.
Yes, I mean, you're right to raise the issue of artificial intelligence. I was reading on the BBC yesterday that the DeepMind computer, which managed to recently beat the world champion of Go, which has in its process, I think there are more potential moves than there are atoms in the universe. They trained a computer, and the computer has finally, after years of work, by analysing all of the games that have ever been played, has now beaten the world champion. Then they took that computer and trained another computer that hadn't seen a single game. And in 3 days, that new computer had learned more than the original one. So AI is, as you say, incrementally, very quickly learning things. But it does come down to willingness to open the backlog. Although perhaps we come down to the issue of rubbish in, rubbish out. There's a hand up at the back.
Yeah, this is one of the parts which I'm very annoyed about, IBM and big data and all that, and Watson.
Yep.
I see, if you look at one end, it's the promise for the future. It's better diagnostic than doctors. It's better. But if you go in and Google, and I would invite you to do so, MD Anderson, one of the biggest cancer centers in the world, sitting in the US, they dumped Watson because it was not better than the clinicians. I talked to some breast cancer clinicians. They tested the new system, the new patient record system with Watson, which has been implemented. And actually, in 8 out of 10 cases, they would have gone to court because the suggestions were actually totally against any kind of good guidance and so. So the only thing I want to make a point of here is that be extremely careful. The easy cases are easy to solve. The hard cases, strangely enough, is hard for a computer to solve also.
So thank you for helping us have some sense of realism around the big hype. And it's certainly true. I'm a huge fan of science fiction, and clearly in that, the artificial intelligence solves everything. I've got 2 hands up who want to come in on this, and I know that I'm going to get a very technical answer from the gentleman in the grey T-shirt.
But short. I'd like to second that, because basically even with artificial intelligence, it all depends on how you model things. So if you don't know how to model things, you get bullshit out of it. Sorry for the word. So,
Hold the
okay.
mic close to your, yes.
Do I need to repeat? So basically, what I was saying is, it all depends on how you model things. So if your model is wrong, you leave out factors, you get just random results. So I strongly would like to second that statement.
Okay, so we have another input there, and then we'll be coming here to the front. Yes.
So I remember that we had a conversation about the fact that, I have to move around, otherwise we have a conversation about the fact that the weathermen are much better than doctors, in predicting weather. But the weathermen, about 15 years ago, developed a very sophisticated computer-based model about how the weather works. And they actually can perform quite much better than doctor. Now, I fully agree that the specialized doctors are much better than the machine right now. But also our eye has been better than the machine until 2015. Now the machine is better than the human eyes to recognize faces, which is our probably best capacity. So while I fully agree with you, because we have to be extremely careful, if the model is rubbish, it's rubbish. However, we have to put in a context of the classifier. Neural networks are classifiers. They simply tell something from out or something else. They are not integrator. So if you give the task that they are able to solve, probably this system works quite well. Okay. So I'm a little bit, fully with you, careful, but we may apply to the right thing.
Okay. Gentleman here, yes. I mean, I'm just aware that I once saw a recent TED talk which said, how will you know if you're going to be replaced by robots? And it said robots are really good at processing large amounts of data about similar things. So if you can have a routine operation or activity, and they can see 300,000 records, they can do it. However, what they can't do, and human beings are really good at, is finding a solution in a novel situation. So the advice they had is find a career where you have to create a new solution each time you do it, and you'll never be replaced by a robot.
Hi, Francesco again from BBMRI. I don't mean to be disruptive, but in the end, the technology is going ahead, and I truly believe that as we've heard here, the discussion can go ahead, and we're getting towards better and better technology, but it won't matter if we lose the trust of the patients, because none of this big data will make any sense if the patients won't provide and feel comfortable in providing the data. And I go back to my initial questions on reciprocity with a little example. One of our biobanks in Estonia, a biobanks federated to BBMRI, is providing 25,000 patients free counseling. So they're mapping their genome, which is extremely valuable, big data, very personal, very, precious, but also dangerous in a way. And they're providing free counseling to 25,000 citizens in the case they find any specific risk. In the meantime, with this data, of course, the biobank provides services to researchers, non-profit, profit, whatever, under a very solid informed consent. I really would like to know the panel's opinion about how broad this new informed consent should be. How can we make sure that big data can actually really, provided the technical expertise and the systems are in place, give something back to the citizens? Because I think that's the key. If there's nothing back, if there's no return, like the colleague from Belgium mentioned, it would be very difficult for the patients to even understand what's going on. And then, of course, the altruistic elan of the patients will be completely wasted. So, informed consent should be broad enough or not that broad? That's my question.
Let me come back to our panel, because we've got lots more coming in from the audience, and we've got some dispute about the extent to which AI, big data, and others will be transformational or even are a good thing. This extent to which they're accurate. But given that there is a strong effort towards that in a generation of the potential synergy of data that exists in other places to generate new insight, not necessarily to replace a doctor, but new insight, how do we make sure that data isn't led by technology, but is led by patients, what they want, what's relevant for their lives, and so it's useful for them? Spiros, maybe you'd like to take this.
It's a crucial question. There are no easy answers about it. It's a responsibility not only of the patient, but of the whole system. I'm thinking, for example, another project which is called Web Radar, that it monitors the side effects that from using of medicines through social media. So, for example, if a patient has a side effect and he writes the side effect in the social media, it can be monitored, and so it can be a useful way to collect side effects. So
there are projects out there that are finding new ways of pulling in information that patients are already willingly sharing on social media and making sure that's fed back into the loop of understanding the results of medication. Excellent. Okay. We are coming towards the end of our time together, so I'm going to invite our panel to think about the last few comments that they want to make. But while we do that, maybe we could show again the final results of our Slido poll, because we'd asked people what would be the main concern that might stop you from participating in big data. And lots of the issues have come up in the audience: the accuracy, the authenticity, the security, etc. But we still come back to the fact that the audience said the number one thing stopping them would be the purpose. Who's going to use it? How are they going to use it? Is it going to be for good? Is it going to be for some evil corporation or some government that's going to control me? Or somebody who's going to deny access? So we really have to find a way of getting the regulatory framework right, building the trust for the consumers, and there being the right incentives for all the players to play together. So what final thoughts would you like to leave us with? Patricia.
And I think what the discussion was important. Indeed, big data and artificial intelligence, the danger of being a hype,
yes,
is that it becomes an end. And it should become a mean to an end. And that end is defined by the purpose, co-defined by the patients and all the other healthcare system. At the end of the day, at least in healthcare, because we're talking big data in healthcare, the main objectives of a healthcare system is the population health, is the financial risk protection, and the customer satisfaction. That always needs to be linked to the purpose. And then the big data is a mean to come to that, with all the necessary, of course, frameworks to ensure that it is well used.
Excellent. Ilaria.
Just 3 flashpoints from my side. Maybe one naive statement. Health data should not be used as a commercial commodity. They belong to patients. They should be used exclusively for medical research to improve quality of care and patient safety. The second point, if we want to make use of big data, then we get to get things right now. And we have to ensure data protection, the security of the system, and informed consent. How broad it is, that's a difficult question I'm not able to answer. The third point is that we have to make the case, again, going back to what Francesco said, we have to make the case for patients, but also for healthcare professionals, and show what big data can bring to them as patients and what can bring to the healthcare system to make it better. Thank you.
Excellent. Spiros, final thoughts.
Encourage patients and patient representatives to get involved and learn more about this issue, which is a complex issue. And for example, I will also share that in Radar CNS, we are looking for new members for the Patient Advisory Board. So if there is any patient in the disease areas of depression, multiple sclerosis or epilepsy in Europe, they can visit the website and contact by asking, becoming a member.
Thank you. Juan.
I think what I think is important is that we promote very much an open mind, open science approach across all parties involved. And agreeing very much with some of the comments, technology is to serve society. And we need to understand which are the needs of society so that we can focus research and technology in this direction. We need to ensure that the public, the society understand the benefits and very much the risk and how these risks are protected, how they are going to be protected, and what kind of use is going to be done with their data that they share, and under which conditions at the very long term, because we have to very much look very much ahead. And I think the only guarantee to continue in the right way is to involve organizations, and I think organization here has an important role to be involved not only in terms of information, but in terms of the process. They need to be part of the process so that we can all progress all together.
Excellent, thank you. And can we offer our panelists a very warm thank you for their participation and engagement.